Sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the plainest paper. In our world where first impressions seem to matter more than character, we've forgotten this simple truth our grandparents knew by heart. This story, set in the Texas frontier of 1882, reminds us that real worth isn't found in fine clothes or social standing, but in the goodness of a person's heart. The morning train wheezed to a stop at Millfield Depot, releasing a cloud of steam that hung in the still air like morning mist. 5 women stepped onto the wooden platform, their skirts rustling against the weathered planks. The scent of coal smoke mixed with prairie grass carried on the gentle breeze. 4 women wore silk dresses with matching parasols, their hair pinned in elaborate styles beneath feathered hats. The 5th woman clutched a worn carpet bag, her blue calico dress carefully patched at the elbows with thread that nearly matched. John Sterling stood beside his buggy, his weathered hands resting on the leather traces. The town's wealthiest rancher could afford any bride he chose. Every eye in Millfield watched as he walked past the silk dresses and stopped before the woman in faded cotton. "You got medicine in that bag." His voice carried the roughness of a man more comfortable with cattle than conversation. Anna lifted her chin, meeting his steady gaze. "Folks on the train took fever. Couldn't just watch them suffer." Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The buggy wheels crunched against gravel as they crested the hill. Anna's fingers tightened around her carpetbag's worn handle, the leather soft from years of use. Below them, the Sterling Ranch spread like a green quilt, thousands of acres rolling toward distant mountains, cattle scattered across the grassland like dark seeds against gold. The scent of sage and prairie grass filled the warm air. Meadowlarks called their liquid songs from fence posts, and somewhere a rooster crowed, though the sun had climbed well past dawn. Anna breathed deep, tasting the clean sweetness of open country after the train's coal smoke. "Biggest spread in 3 counties, John said, his voice carrying neither pride nor boast, just simple fact. Anna counted the men working near the corrals. 12, maybe 15 cowhands moving slower than they should in the morning coolness. She watched one lean heavy against a fence post, his face pale beneath his hat brim despite the gentle sun. "That fellow's poorly," she said, pointing toward the corral. John's jaw tightened. "Doc Jenkins never said nothing about, 'Look at his fingernails when we pass.'" The cowhand they passed had yellow crescents under each nail, his gums pale as old bone when he spat into the dust. Another man stumbled slightly carrying a water bucket, catching himself on the corral rail with a grunt. Anna's stomach clenched. She'd seen this sickness before on the wagon trains heading west, men who worked hard but ate wrong. "They got the scurvy, that one too." She nodded toward a thin cowhand whose lips had cracked at the corners like old leather. The buggy stopped beside a 2-story house with a wraparound porch that creaked in the prairie breeze. John helped her down, his calloused palm rough but gentle against her fingers. Wild roses climbed the porch posts, their sweet perfume mixing with the earthy smell of the kitchen garden. Anna walked to where vegetables grew behind the house. Wild onions pushed through rich soil near the fence, their green shoots bright against brown earth. She knelt and pinched one between her thumb and forefinger, breathing the sharp scent that made her eyes water slightly. "Beans and beef ain't enough," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. The soil left dark crescents under her own fingernails. "They need fresh greens." or you'll lose half your crew before winter comes." John's boots shifted in the gravel, scraping like grinding stones. That evening, kerosene lamplight flickered across the kitchen table, casting dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. The smell of coal oil mixed with coffee grounds and leftover bacon grease. Anna spread brown wrapping paper flat and sketched rough lines with a pencil stub worn smooth by use. A small room, shelves along one wall, a window facing east for morning light. "We could fix up that storage room off the barn," she said, her pencil marking where the door would swing. "Nothing fancy, just somewhere to tend folks proper." John studied the drawing, his weathered face unreadable in the yellow light. The lamp wick sputtered, sending shadows dancing across the paper like ghosts. Outside, a coyote called from the distant hills, a lonesome sound that made Anna shiver despite the warm evening. "Why?" The word came out harder than John had intended, hanging in the still air between them. Anna set down the pencil and looked directly at him. Her next words balanced on the edge of everything that would follow. But before she could speak, hoofbeats thundered into the yard, someone riding hard in the darkness, shouting words that would change everything they'd planned. The rider's horse skidded to a halt outside the kitchen window, foam flecking its muzzle white in the lamplight. Dust swirled through the yellow glow as boots hit the ground hard. "Mr. Sterling," the voice cracked with urgency. "Got trouble at the Henderson place. Their boy's burning up with fever." John pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against wooden floorboards. Anna folded the brown paper carefully, her hands steady despite the sudden commotion. "How long's the child been sick?" she asked through the open window. The rider, young Tommy Miller from town, wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. 3 days, ma'am. Can't keep nothing down. Mrs. Henderson's beside herself." Anna's fingers worked quickly, untying her apron strings. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across her shoulders like an old shawl. "Tell her we're coming." The buggy ride to town passed in tense silence, except for wheels grinding over packed earth and the steady clip-clop of hooves. Anna clutched her carpetbag tight, feeling the dried herbs shift inside their cloth bundles. The night air carried the scent of cooling grass and distant wood smoke from kitchen stoves. Henderson's house sat at the end of Main Street, lamplight glowing warm in every window. Mary Henderson met them at the gate, her gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "Thank the Lord you've come," she whispered, gripping Anna's arm with desperate fingers. "Tommy's been calling for his papa, but his papa's been dead these 2 years." Anna followed Mary up the front steps, their footsteps echoing hollow on the wooden porch. The house smelled of carbolic soap and something else, the sour scent of sickness that made her stomach clench with recognition. Tommy Henderson lay in a narrow bed near the kitchen stove, his small body twisted in damp sheets. Fever blazed from his skin like heat from a forge, and his breathing came in quick, shallow gasps. His lips had cracked from thirst, though a water cup sat untouched on the bedside table. Anna pressed her palm to the boy's forehead. The heat shocked her, hot enough to addle-brain a grown man, let alone a child of 8. She lifted his eyelids with gentle fingers, noting how his pupils had shrunk to pinpoints despite the dim room. "Fetch me a basin of cool water," she said to Mary, "and clean cloths, lots of them," while Mary bustled about gathering supplies. Anna opened her carpetbag and selected her medicines by touch alone. Willow bark for the fever, slippery elm for his damaged throat, chamomile to help him rest. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory, "Measure twice. Give once. A mistake can kill as sure as the sickness." She ground willow bark to powder using Mary's wooden spoon and mixing bowl, the bitter scent rising sharp in the warm kitchen air, mixed with honey and a splash of water. It formed a paste thin enough to swallow but thick enough to stay down. Tommy's eyes fluttered open when Anna touched the spoon to his cracked lips. For a moment, he focused on her face with the clarity that sometimes comes before the end. "Are you an angel?" he whispered, his voice no stronger than autumn leaves. "Just a woman with some medicine," Anna replied, spooning the mixture carefully between his lips. "Swallow if you can, child." The boy's throat worked weakly, managing to take down 3 small spoonfuls before his strength gave out. Anna wrapped cool, wet cloths around his wrists and ankles, places where blood flowed close to the skin, where cooling would spread fastest through his burning body. Mary Henderson sat in a straight-backed chair beside the bed, her hands twisted in her apron like she was wringing wash. "Will he live?" Anna wrung out another cloth in the basin, the cool water running between her fingers. "We'll know by morning. Fever's got to break before it cooks his brain." She worked through the night, changing cloths as they warmed against Tommy's skin, spooning medicine between his lips every hour, checking his pulse against her wrist. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the silence, marking time like a funeral march. Near dawn, Tommy's breathing deepened. The terrible heat radiating from his small body began to ease, and sweat beaded on his forehead, the first good sign Anna had seen. His mother dozed fitfully in her chair. Exhausted from 3 nights of worry, Anna stepped onto the front porch as the eastern sky lightened from black to gray. The morning air felt cool against her face, carrying the promise of another scorching day. Roosters crowed from backyard coops, and smoke began to rise from kitchen chimneys as the town stirred to life. Behind her, Tommy Henderson slept peacefully for the first time in days. His fever had broken just as the sun touched the horizon, leaving him weak but breathing easy. Mary had wept with relief, pressing Anna's hands to her wet cheeks in wordless gratitude. But as Anna watched the sunrise paint the eastern mountains gold, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Dust clouds on the horizon. Not one rider this time, but several wagons approaching fast from different directions, all converging on the town where word would spread quickly about the woman who'd brought a dying child back from the edge of the grave. How many more were coming, and how many could she possibly save? The first wagon arrived at Sterling Ranch before the morning dew had dried from the grass. Anna watched from the kitchen window as the Pattersons from Willow Creek climbed down from their buckboard, their faces grim with worry. Mrs. Patterson carried a bundle wrapped in quilts, another child burning with fever. "Word travels fast," John said, setting his coffee cup on the wooden table with a soft clink. Anna wiped her hands on her apron, already moving toward the door. The familiar weight of other people's suffering settled on her shoulders like a yoke. "That storage room ready?" John nodded toward the barn. 3 days of hard work had transformed the dusty space into something resembling a proper sick room. Pine boards lined the walls, still smelling of fresh sawdust and lye soap. Sunlight streamed through the enlarged window, painting squares of gold across the whitewashed floor. The sound of hammering had filled those days, John measuring boards twice before cutting, his calloused hands working the saw with patient strokes that sent wood shavings curling to the ground. Anna had sorted dried herbs while he worked, filling glass mason jars with carefully measured portions of willow bark, echinacea, and slippery elm. "Higher on that end," she'd said when he mounted the medicine shelf, her voice carrying quiet certainty that made him adjust the board without question. Now the converted room held 3 narrow beds with fresh straw mattresses, shelves lined with bottles and jars, and a work table where Anna could mix her medicines. The sharp scent of carbolic acid lingered from her thorough cleaning, mixing with the earthy smell of new lumber. Charlie Patterson carried his daughter Emma through the door, her small face flushed red as summer roses. The child's breathing came in quick gasps, and her eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Anna guided them to the first bed, noting how Emma's skin blazed with heat, even through her cotton nightgown. "Started yesterday morning," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Same fever that took the Morrison boy over in Cedar Valley." Anna's hands stilled on Emma's forehead. "Morrison boy died 3 days ago. His mama's half crazy with grief." The news hit Anna like cold water. She'd assumed Tommy Henderson's recovery meant she understood this sickness, that willow bark and cool cloths would be enough. But if children were dying despite treatment. More wagons appeared throughout the morning. The Millers brought their youngest son, burning with fever and calling for his dead grandfather. Old Henrik Larsson arrived alone, his weathered face gray with illness, barely able to sit upright in his cart seat. By noon, Anna had 6 patients in beds meant for 3. She moved between them like a dancer, following well-worn steps, checking temperatures, spooning medicine between cracked lips, changing sweat-soaked bedding that her hands wrung out in basins of cool water. John appeared at her elbow carrying fresh water from the well, the bucket handle cutting red marks in his palms. "Need more beds," he said. "Need more hands, too," Anna replied, wiping Emma Patterson's face with a damp cloth. The little girl's fever hadn't responded to willow bark tea, and her breathing grew more labored with each hour. The afternoon heat climbed past 100 degrees, turning the infirmary into an oven despite the open windows. Anna's dress clung to her back with sweat, and her legs shook from exhaustion. She'd been working for 18 hours, with only snatches of rest between patients. Dr. Miller arrived from Sweetwater just as the sun touched the western mountains. The elderly physician climbed down from his buggy with obvious effort, his medical bag clutched in trembling hands. His face looked haggard, eyes sunken deep in their sockets. "Heard you've been treating the fever," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the evening cool. Anna nodded toward the infirmary. 6 patients? 3 children? Dr. Miller's shoulders sagged. "Lost 4 yesterday in Sweetwater. 2 more today." He looked toward the converted barn, lamplight already glowing in the windows. "What you using for treatment?" "Willow bark for fever. Cool compresses. Liquids when they can keep them down." Anna watched his face for approval, but found only grim resignation. "Same as me. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it don't." Dr. Miller hefted his bag with visible effort. "Mind if I take a look?" They walked together toward the infirmary, their footsteps echoing hollow on the wooden walkway John had built between house and barn. Night sounds began to fill the air, crickets chirping in the grass, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the soft murmur of families gathered around sickbeds. Inside the infirmary, patients lay in various stages of illness. Emma Patterson thrashed in fever dreams, calling for her mother in a voice thin as paper. The Miller boy stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes, his lips moving in silent conversation with invisible visitors. Henrik Larsson's breathing had grown shallow and quick, each breath a visible struggle. Dr. Miller moved from bed to bed, his weathered hands gentle as he checked pulses and listened to labored breathing. Anna watched his face grow grimmer with each examination. "This ain't ordinary fever," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Dr. Miller looked toward the window where darkness pressed against the glass. In the distance, Anna could see more lights approaching, lanterns and torches marking the arrival of additional families seeking help. "Been doctoring 40 years, he said. "Never seen sickness spread this fast, hit this hard." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like mirrors. "And never seen it strike multiple valleys at the same time." Anna's stomach clenched. Multiple valleys. "Got word from Cedar Creek, Pine Ridge, and Sweetwater, all reporting the same thing: sudden outbreak, high fever, children dying faster than adults." Dr. Miller's voice cracked on the words. "Something's poisoning the water supply." The implications crashed over Anna like a breaking dam. If the water was contaminated, then every well, every stream, every source people used for drinking carried death. And if it had spread to multiple valleys... A new sound reached them through the open window, the distant thunder of many horses approaching at full gallop. Not families bringing their sick this time, but riders moving with military precision through the darkness. Who rode in formation after midnight? And what news could drive them to such desperate speed? The riders emerged from darkness like ghosts made flesh, 6 men on lathered horses, their badges glinting in the lamplight. The lead rider swung down from his saddle with the careful movements of a man who'd been riding hard for days. "Marshal Webb," he said, tipping his hat to Anna. "Territorial Office sent us to investigate the water situation." Dr. Miller stepped forward, his medical bag clutched tight in both hands. "What water situation?" Marshal Webb's weathered face looked grim in the flickering light. Sweat stains darkened his shirt despite the cool night air, and dust coated his clothes like flour. 5 valleys reporting the same outbreak. Started 2 weeks ago in Pine Ridge, spread east from there. Anna's breath caught in her throat. "How many dead?" 23 so far. Mostly children and old folks." Webb removed his hat, running fingers through gray hair that stuck to his scalp with perspiration. "But here's what's got headquarters worried. The pattern's too regular, too organized." John emerged from the house carrying a pot of coffee, steam rising from the spout in the cool air. "What kind of pattern?" Webb accepted a cup with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. The hot coffee seemed to steady him as he spoke. "Hits the highest elevation valley first, then spreads downstream. Always follows the same water sources." Anna felt ice form in her stomach despite the summer heat lingering in the evening air. "You saying someone's poisoning the water on purpose? That's what we aim to find out." Webb drained his coffee cup and handed it back to John. "Need to examine your water sources come daylight. Test them proper." The marshal's men made camp in the ranch yard, their horses tied to the corral fence with weary heads hanging low. Anna returned to the infirmary, where her patients lay in various stages of fever. Emma Patterson's breathing had grown more labored, each breath requiring visible effort that made her small chest work like a bellows. Dawn brought scorching heat that pressed down like a wool blanket. The thermometer on the porch read 98 degrees before the sun cleared the mountains, promising another day that would climb past 110. Anna carried water buckets from the well, noting how the metal handle burned her palms even through her work gloves. Marshal Webb and his men examined every water source on Sterling property, the main well, the stock tanks, the creek that ran along the eastern boundary. They collected samples in glass bottles, sealing each with wax and careful labels written in precise script. "Water tastes fine," Webb said, wiping his mouth after sampling from the well. "But poison don't always have a flavor." Anna watched them work, her own hands busy with the endless tasks of nursing. Emma Patterson's fever had climbed higher during the night, and the child now lay unconscious. Her skin burning hot as a stove lid, cool cloths did nothing to bring down the terrible heat radiating from her small body. The morning brought new patients. 3 cowhands from the Lazy K Ranch arrived in a buckboard, their faces flushed red with fever and their eyes bright with delirium. One called constantly for his mother, though he was 30 years old. Another stared at the ceiling, carrying on animated conversations with invisible companions. By noon, Anna had 12 patients crowded into space, meant for 6. Mattresses covered the infirmary floor, and the smell of sweat and sickness hung thick in the superheated air. She moved between beds like a woman walking underwater, each step requiring tremendous effort as the heat sapped her strength. John appeared at her elbow with a cup of water that felt blessedly cool against her cracked lips. "You're working yourself to death," he said. Anna wiped sweat from her forehead with a damp cloth. "Can't stop. Emma's getting worse. And that cowhand from Lazy K." She looked toward Pete Hawkins, who lay still as death, except for the barely visible rise and fall of his chest. The afternoon heat climbed past 105 degrees. Cattle gathered in whatever shade they could find, tongues hanging out as they panted. Even the ranch dogs sought shelter under the porch, too hot to chase their usual prey of grasshoppers and field mice. Marshal Webb returned from examining the upstream water sources, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. Sweat had carved channels through the dust on his cheeks, and his shirt stuck to his back with dark stains. "Found something," he said, motioning Anna and John toward the house where shade offered minimal relief from the blazing sun. Inside the kitchen, Webb spread a hand-drawn map across the wooden table. Red X marks indicated locations along the creek system that fed their valley, with dates written beside each mark in careful script. "Started here." Webb pointed to the highest X. "Dead sheep in the water. Been there maybe 2 weeks. But look at this." His finger moved to marks lower on the creek. "More dead animals at regular intervals, all the way down to your property line." Anna studied the pattern, noting how the X marks formed an almost perfect line following the water's flow, too perfect to be natural. "Animals don't die that regular," she said. "No, ma'am, they don't." Webb rolled up the map with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion or something deeper. Someone's been placing dead animals in the water supply, timing it so the poison reaches each valley in sequence. The implication struck Anna like a physical blow, not an accident or natural disaster, but deliberate murder carried out with methodical precision. Someone had planned the death of entire communities. Calculating how long it would take contaminated water to flow from valley to valley, John's jaw tightened. "Who'd do such a thing? That's what we aim to find out." Webb tucked the map inside his vest pocket. But whoever's behind this, they know these mountains better than most, know the water systems, the timing, how fast news travels between valleys. As evening approached, Anna noticed something that made her skin crawl with dread. The sickest patients. Emma Patterson. Old Henrik Larsson, two of the lazy K cowhands, had stopped responding to her treatments entirely. Their fevers climbed higher despite willow bark tea and cool compresses, and their breathing grew more labored with each passing hour. She was losing them. All her knowledge, all her determination, all her desperate efforts were failing against whatever poison flowed through their water. But as darkness fell and lamplight flickered through the infirmary windows, Marshal Webb brought news that made her blood run cold. "Just got word by telegraph," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The next valley downstream, Cottonwood Creek, they started taking sick this morning." Anna's hands stilled on Emma Patterson's fevered brow. If the pattern held, if the poison continued its methodical spread down the water system, then every community from here to the territorial capital would face the same outbreak. Hundreds of families, thousands of people, all drinking from water sources that carried death in their depths. But what chilled her most was Webb's final words. "And we just lost contact with our telegraph operator in Millfield. Line went dead an hour ago." Someone was cutting their communications, isolating each valley as the sickness spread, which meant whoever was behind the poisonings was still out there, still active, and moving closer to Sterling Ranch with each passing hour. Emma Patterson died at sunrise. Anna knelt beside the small bed, her palm pressed to the child's still chest, feeling for any flutter of life that might remain. Nothing. The little girl's heart had stopped some time before dawn, while Anna dozed fitfully in a chair, exhausted from 3 sleepless nights. Mrs. Patterson sat rigid on a wooden stool, her hands twisted in her apron until her knuckles showed white as bone. "She's just sleeping," she whispered in a sing-song voice that made Anna's skin crawl. "My Emma's finally sleeping peaceful." Anna pulled a clean sheet over Emma's face, her hands trembling as she tucked the corners smooth. The child's mother had taken fever during the night, her eyes now bright with delirium that painted false comfort over unbearable loss. The infirmary door creaked open. John entered carrying fresh water, the bucket handle cutting red marks into his palms. Behind him came more families, desperate faces carrying bundles wrapped in quilts, seeking help from the only person who'd shown any ability to heal. By noon, Anna counted 17 patients in space, meant for 6. Mattresses covered every inch of floor, and the smell of sickness hung thick in the stifling heat. She moved between beds like a woman walking through molasses, each step requiring tremendous effort as her own strength ebbed. Pete Hawkins thrashed in the corner bed, his weathered hands clawing at empty air. "Maria," he called out, his voice cracking like old leather. "Don't drink the water. Maria, something's wrong with the water." Anna spooned willow bark tea between his cracked lips, watching most of it dribble down his stubbled chin. The medicine that had saved Tommy Henderson seemed powerless against whatever poison flowed through their valley's water system. Her own hands shook as she wrung out cloths in basins of cool water. The tremor had started that morning, a fine quiver in her fingers that spread up her arms like ripples on a pond. She recognized the early signs from tending other patients' weakness, sweating, the way food turned to sand in her mouth. She was infected. The realization settled in her chest like a cold stone, but she pushed it aside. 17 people depended on her, and there was no one else with even her limited knowledge of healing. Marshal Webb appeared at her elbow, his face grim beneath the brim of his dusty hat. "Doc Miller's taken sick," he said. "Found him this morning, burning with fever and talking to his dead wife." Anna's legs nearly buckled. Dr. Miller had been her only source of real medical knowledge, the one person who might understand what they faced. "Where is he?" "In his wagon outside. Too weak to stand." Webb removed his hat, running fingers through gray hair sticky with sweat. "That makes 18 patients, and you the only one still on your feet." The afternoon heat climbed past 108 degrees, turning the infirmary into an oven that baked the smell of sweat and sickness into the wooden walls. Anna's dress clung to her back, soaked through with perspiration that carried the salt taste of exhaustion on her lips. 3 more patients arrived as the sun touched the western mountains. The Hendersons brought their youngest daughter, barely 5 years old, her small body burning with the same fever that had nearly killed her brother Tommy. Mary Henderson wept as she laid the child on the last available mattress. "Tommy got better," she said, gripping Anna's wrist with desperate fingers. "Tell me little Sarah will get better too." Anna looked down at the child, noting the telltale signs: flushed skin hot as forge coals, breathing quick and shallow, lips cracked despite attempts to force water between them. The same symptoms that had killed Emma Patterson just hours before. "We'll do everything we can," Anna said, her voice coming out as a rasp. Her throat had swollen nearly shut, making each word an effort that sent pain shooting through her chest. Night fell like a black blanket over the ranch. Anna moved between beds by lamplight, checking pulses that fluttered like trapped birds, spooning medicine between lips that burned with fever. Her vision blurred at the edges, and twice she had to grip a bedpost to keep from falling. John found her collapsed beside Henrik Larsson's bed at midnight, her head resting on the old rancher's still chest. Henrik had died sometime during the evening, his breathing growing shallower until it stopped entirely while Anna tended other patients. "That's 4, John said, helping her to a chair that felt like salvation under her trembling legs. Anna wiped vomit from her lips with the back of her hand, tasting bile and blood where her throat had torn from retching. 17 still alive. Have to keep trying. You can barely stand. Can't stop." Anna tried to rise and fell back into the chair, her legs refusing to support her weight. "Sarah Henderson's getting worse, and that cowhand from Lazy K." She looked toward a bed where breathing came in gasps so shallow they barely moved the blanket. The infirmary door opened, letting in cool night air that felt like a blessing against Anna's fevered skin. Marshal Webb entered with news written clear on his haggard face. "Telegraph line to territorial capital went dead an hour ago," he said. "We're cut off complete now." Anna's vision swam as the implications hit her. No communication meant no help coming from outside, no fresh supplies, no additional doctors, no cavalry riding to their rescue, just her failing strength against an epidemic that showed no signs of slowing. "There's more," Webb continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Found fresh horse tracks near the creek, maybe 6 riders. Someone's been watching us." The words sent ice through Anna's fever-heated blood. While she'd been fighting to save lives, someone had been observing their struggle from the shadows, counting the dead, perhaps, or waiting for the perfect moment to finish what the poisoned water had started. A new sound drifted through the open window, the distant rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. but wrong somehow. Too many horses, moving too fast for families bringing their sick, more like riders with a specific destination and deadly purpose. Webb's hand moved instinctively to his gun belt. Company coming? And they ain't bringing patience. Anna struggled to stand, her legs shaking like autumn leaves. Through the window, she could see torches moving through the darkness, at least a dozen riders approaching the ranch with military precision, who rode in formation after midnight, carrying torches like they meant to burn something down. Anna's knees buckled as she reached for the infirmary door. The wooden planks rushed up to meet her, splintering her kneecaps through the thin fabric of her dress. The impact sent shockwaves through bones that felt hollow as bird wings, but she crawled the final 3 feet to grasp the door handle with fingers that shook like leaves in a storm. The riders reined their horses 20 yards from the infirmary, torchlight painting their faces in harsh angles of shadow and flame. Not outlaws or night riders, these men wore clean clothes and carried themselves with the authority of town officials. Banker Morrison sat his horse at their center, his pressed suit somehow still pristine, despite the midnight hour. "Mrs. Sterling," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a man accustomed to obedience. "We need to discuss the situation." Anna hauled herself upright using the doorframe, leaving sweaty handprints on the whitewashed wood. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to dump her back into the dirt where she belonged. Behind her, the infirmary reeked of death and failure, 4 bodies covered with sheets, 13 more sliding toward the same fate. "Now ain't the time," John said, stepping between the delegation and Anna's wavering form. "It's exactly the time." Morrison's horse pranced sideways, hooves striking sparks from stone. 4 dead in 2 days, more dying every hour. Maybe it's time to let nature take its course instead of prolonging the suffering. Anna tried to speak and managed only a wet wheeze. Her throat had closed almost completely, swollen shut like a strangled animal's. She opened her mouth again, desperate to defend her efforts, but only bloody spittle emerged to streak down her chin. "She's in over her head," said Preacher Williams from atop a bay gelding. "Playing doctor when she ought to be praying." The words hit Anna like physical blows. She doubled over, retching thin bile that splattered across her boots and mixed with the dust to form foul-smelling mud. The acidic liquid burned her raw throat, bringing tears that she wiped away with the back of her trembling hand. More riders materialized from the darkness, families who'd brought their sick to her just days before, now sitting their horses with faces carved from stone. Mrs. Patterson clutched her surviving son close, her eyes reflecting torchlight like broken glass. "My Emma's dead because of her," Mrs. Patterson said, pointing at Anna with a shaking finger. "That woman promised she could heal, but all she brought was more death." Anna sank to her knees in the mud she'd made with her own vomit. The smell rose around her like a cloud of shame, mixing with the stench of her unwashed body and fever-soaked clothes. She'd lost control of everything, her patience, the community's trust, her own failing flesh. "Please," Anna whispered, the word barely audible above the horses stamping and snorting. "Let me try." "Try what?" Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "You've had your chance. 4 coffins is enough." Inside the infirmary, Sarah Henderson began to cry. Thin, keening wails that cut through the night air like a rusty saw blade. The 5-year-old called for her mother, but Mary Henderson sat frozen on her horse, torn between defending Anna and protecting her remaining child. Anna crawled through the mud toward the infirmary, her hands and knees squelching in the filth. Somewhere she'd lost her dignity along with her strength. But the children inside needed medicine. Sarah Henderson's fever hadn't broken, and Pete Hawkins had stopped responding entirely to her treatments. "Look at her," someone called from the crowd of riders. "Crawling in the dirt like a snake." Anna's face burned with shame, hotter than any fever. These people had trusted her with their most precious possessions. Their children. Their elderly. Their hope for the future. She'd failed them all, watching helplessly as patients died despite her desperate efforts. The infirmary door seemed miles away. Each movement forward cost tremendous effort, her arms shaking with exhaustion as she pulled herself through mud that clung to her dress like accusations. Behind her, the voices continued their judgment, listing her failures in precise detail. Tommy Morrison dead, Emma Patterson dead, Henrik Larsson dead, Dr. Miller burning with fever. 17 patients crammed into space meant for 6, most of them sliding toward death despite her care. John knelt beside her in the mud, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "You didn't kill them. Didn't save them either." Anna's words came out as gasps between retching fits, her body convulsed with chills despite the fever burning through her blood. And she could taste copper where she'd bitten her tongue. The torches cast dancing shadows across the infirmary walls, making the building look like it was already on fire. Inside, patients moaned and called out in delirium, their voices blending into a chorus of suffering that Anna had proven powerless to silence. Marshal Webb appeared at her other side, his badge catching torchlight. "Ma'am, maybe it's time to step aside. Let folks make their own choices about treatment." Anna pressed her face to the mud, feeling grit grind between her teeth. The earth smelled of horse manure and her own failures. A perfect bed for someone who'd promised healing but delivered only death. She'd come west to help people, but all she'd accomplished was giving false hope to the desperate. "Can't," she whispered into the dirt. "Still got patients inside." "Patients you can't help," Morrison said from his horse high above. "Time to admit defeat and let the fever run its course." The crowd began to disperse, families loading their remaining sick into wagons and departing without backward glances. Anna watched them leave through eyes blurred with tears and fever, knowing she'd lost their trust forever. The woman who'd arrived at the depot with medicine in her bag had become the woman who crawled in mud outside her own infirmary. But as the last torches disappeared into darkness, John helped her struggle to her feet. Inside the infirmary, Sarah Henderson's cries had grown weaker, and Pete Hawkins' breathing came in gasps barely strong enough to flutter a feather. "We're alone now," John said, his arm steady around her trembling shoulders. Anna looked toward the infirmary, where lamplight flickered through windows like dying hope. 13 patients still clung to life inside, though barely. If she gave up now, they'd all follow the same path as Emma Patterson and the others. But as she took her first shaking step toward the door, she noticed something that made her blood freeze despite the fever burning through her veins. Fresh hoofprints in the mud, too small and neat to belong to any of the horses that had just departed. Someone else had been watching from the shadows during the confrontation. Someone who rode a different kind of horse entirely, and who'd stayed hidden while the townspeople delivered their judgment. The same someone who'd been poisoning water supplies across 5 valleys, methodically murdering entire communities for reasons Anna couldn't begin to fathom. They were still out there in the darkness, and now they knew exactly how weak and isolated the Sterling Ranch had become. Anna woke to silence where screaming should have been. The constant moaning and thrashing that had filled the infirmary for days had stopped, replaced by something that made her heart hammer against her ribs. the sound of peaceful breathing. She lifted her head from the wooden floor where she'd collapsed. Her neck stiff as rusted iron, dried mud flaked from her cheek as she moved, reminders of the previous night's humiliation still clinging to her skin like shame made solid. Pete Hawkins sat upright in his bed, his weathered face clear for the first time in a week. His eyes tracked her movement without the fever-bright glaze that had consumed him. And when he spoke, his voice carried the roughness of a man who'd been close to death but found his way back. "You look like something the cat dragged in," he said, managing a weak smile that cracked his chapped lips. Anna pushed herself upright, her arms trembling with the effort. The room spun around her like a child's top, but she managed to stay vertical long enough to press her palm against Pete's forehead. Cool. Normal. The fever that had burned through him like wildfire had broken completely. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice coming as a whisper through her swollen throat. "Most of the night. John's been checking on folks, bringing water." Pete gestured toward the other beds with a hand that shook only slightly. Fever started breaking around midnight, one by one, like dominoes falling backwards. Anna moved between the beds on legs that felt like green willow branches. Sarah Henderson lay quiet, her small chest rising and falling in normal rhythm instead of the desperate gasps that had terrified her mother. The child's skin felt warm but not burning, and when Anna lifted her eyelids, the pupils focused properly instead of rolling back to show only whites. Mrs. Patterson sat beside another bed, tears streaming down her face as she held her surviving son's hand. The boy who'd been calling for his dead father just hours before now squeezed his mother's fingers and asked for a cup of water in a voice that sounded human again. "What happened?" Anna asked, though part of her was afraid to trust what she was seeing. Too many times she'd watched patients seem to recover only to slip away when their strength failed. John appeared in the doorway, carrying an armload of fresh linens, his clothes dusty, but his face showing something Anna hadn't seen in days. Hope, tempered by exhaustion, but hope nonetheless. "New well came through around 3 this morning," he said, setting down the linens and wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hit clean water at 40 feet. Been hauling buckets all night, giving everyone fresh water instead of what we've been drawing from the contaminated source." Anna looked at the water barrels lining the walls, noting how the liquid inside ran clear as crystal without the faint cloudiness she'd grown accustomed to. Clean water, not just boiled, but drawn from a source untouched by whatever poison had flowed through their valley. "That's not all," John continued. "Marshall Webb found something upstream that changes everything," before Anna could ask what he meant. The sound of approaching wagons filled the morning air, not the desperate flight of families fleeing her failures, but the careful pace of people returning with hope instead of fear. Mary Henderson climbed down from the first wagon, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights, but also something else, the tentative relief of a mother whose child had stepped back from death's door. Behind her came other families who'd departed in anger just hours before. "Mrs. Sterling," Mary said, removing her bonnet with hands that still trembled. We heard the fevers broke. Wanted to see Sarah." Anna stepped aside as Mary rushed to her daughter's bedside. The little girl opened her eyes at her mother's voice, focusing on the familiar face with clarity that had been absent for days. When she spoke, asking for milk and honey cakes in a voice weak but recognizably her own. Mary Henderson dissolved into tears of relief. Other families gathered around their recovering relatives, voices mixing in a chorus of wonder and gratitude that felt strange after days of accusation and despair. Banker Morrison appeared in the doorway, his pressed suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, but his expression carrying something Anna had never seen there before. Shame. "Miss Anna," he said, removing his hat and turning it between his hands like a schoolboy called to account. "We were wrong to turn on you yesterday, wrong to blame you for doing what none of us had the courage to attempt." Anna tried to speak, and found her voice had returned along with her patient's health. "You were scared. People do foolish things when they're scared." "No excuse for it." Morrison's voice cracked on the words. "You kept trying even when we gave up hope. Kept working even when you were sick yourself. Takes a special kind of strength to do that." The morning brought more evidence of recovery. Pete Hawkins stood and walked to the infirmary window under his own power, his legs wobbling but supporting his weight. Sarah Henderson sat up and accepted a cup of milk, keeping it down without the retching that had plagued her for days. Dr. Miller arrived in his buggy just as the sun climbed above the eastern mountains, looking haggard but alert. His fever had broken during the night, leaving him weak but rational for the first time since taking sick. "Clean water did it," he said, accepting a cup of the fresh well water and drinking deeply. "Whatever was in the old source, cutting it off stopped the poisoning in its tracks. Bodies could finally fight back." Anna moved among her recovering patients, noting how appetites returned along with strength. Color crept back into pale cheeks, and hands that had shaken with fever now held cups steady. The transformation seemed almost miraculous, but she understood the simple truth beneath it. The clean water had stopped new poison from entering their systems, while willow bark tea and careful nursing had supported their bodies through the worst of the crisis. They'd survived not through any miracle cure, but because someone had refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. John found her sitting on the infirmary steps as afternoon shadows began to lengthen. The same place she'd collapsed in despair just 24 hours before. Everything had changed. Patients sat up in bed, sharing quiet conversations. Children played gentle games in the dust. Families spoke of plans for tomorrow instead of preparing for funerals. 13 patients, he said, settling beside her on the wooden steps. 13 recovered. Not one lost after we switched to clean water. Anna watched Pete Hawkins help Sarah Henderson take her first steps outside the infirmary. The old cowhand's weathered hands gentle as he guided the little girl's uncertain feet. Still lost 4 before that: Tommy, Emma, Henrik, and Mrs. Patterson's oldest boy. Saved 13. John's shoulder touched hers, warm and solid in the afternoon sun. Without you, we'd have lost them all. The truth of it settled in Anna's chest like warm honey. She'd crawled through mud and shame, faced the community's anger and her own failing strength. But she'd never stopped trying. That stubborn refusal to quit had made all the difference. But as the sun touched the western mountains, Marshall Webb appeared with news that changed everything she thought she understood about their ordeal. Found the real source of the poison, he said, his face grim despite the day's victories. He held up a folded paper that looked official, with territorial seals and careful script. And it ain't what any of us thought. Anna felt her stomach clench despite the relief of recovery all around them. What do you mean? Webb unfolded the document, revealing careful diagrams and written reports that made her blood run cold as she read the first few lines. Not accident, not natural disaster, but something far worse: deliberate murder carried out with methodical precision. But what chilled her most was the final paragraph, written in official territorial script. Eastern Mining Consortium authorized to use any means necessary to clear settlement from mineral-rich valleys. Water contamination approved as acceptable method. Someone in a distant office had signed orders for the systematic murder of entire communities, treating human lives like obstacles to be removed rather than souls worthy of protection. And according to the document's date, their valley had been just the beginning of a much larger plan. The document trembled in Anna's hands as she read the damning words again. Eastern Mining Consortium, authorized contamination, acceptable losses. Each phrase hammered against her chest like physical blows, stealing the breath from her lungs. "How many valleys?" she whispered. Marshall Webb's weathered face looked carved from granite in the afternoon light. 12 marked for clearing, according to this. Ours was number 6 in the sequence. Anna's vision blurred as the magnitude struck her. Not just their community, but hundreds of families across the territory, men in distant offices calculating how many children could die before mineral rights became profitable. Measuring human lives against ore, deposits like items in a ledger book. "What happens now?" John asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Territorial governors sending troops. Federal marshals, too." Webb folded the document carefully, tucking it inside his vest pocket. "But that'll take weeks. Meanwhile, word spreading about what you accomplished here, keeping folks alive when they should have died according to the consortium's plans." Anna looked across the ranch yard where her former patients sat with their families in the golden afternoon light. Pete Hawkins shared coffee with his bunkmates, his weathered face animated as he told stories of his fever dreams. Sarah Henderson played quiet games with wooden dolls, her small voice bright with laughter that had been absent for too long. "Other valleys are asking for help," Webb continued. "Question is whether you're willing to ride to the next target and do it again." The weight of the request settled on Anna's shoulders like a lead blanket. More poisoned water, more dying children, more knights crawling across floors to force medicine between blue lips. The thought of it made her knees weak with exhaustion that went deeper than bone. But she also remembered the sound of Emma Patterson's mother weeping over her still daughter. How many other mothers were losing children right now because men in city offices wanted their land cleared of human obstacles? "How far to the next valley?" she asked. 2 days hard riding to Cottonwood Creek, but they got maybe 5 days before the poisoning gets too advanced to treat. John stepped closer, his shoulder brushing hers in the warm afternoon air. His weathered hands showed fresh rope burns from drawing water all night, but his voice carried steady determination. "If you go, I go too." Anna studied his face in the lamplight. This man who'd chosen her from a depot platform when she arrived in rags, who'd helped build the infirmary with bleeding hands, who'd stayed beside her through the community's anger and her own failures. His features showed resolve mixed with something deeper. "Why?" she asked. "Because what we built here works," John said. "Not just the doctoring, but the partnership. You got the healing knowledge. I got the resources to make it happen. Together we saved 13 lives that would have been lost." The truth of it resonated in Anna's chest like a church bell on Sunday morning. They had built something together, not just an infirmary, but a way of fighting back against those who measured human worth in dollars and mining claims. Her medical knowledge, combined with his practical skills, could save lives in valley after valley. The afternoon shadows grew longer as recovering patients prepared for the journey home. Families loaded wagons with careful movements, their faces showing exhaustion mixed with gratitude. Mary Henderson approached as Anna checked Sarah's temperature one final time. "She's asking for you to visit," Mary said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite express. "Says you're the angel lady who made the fever go away." Anna knelt beside Sarah's wagon, noting how the child's eyes focused clearly without the glassy stare of delirium. "You keep drinking plenty of water. You hear clean water from your own well." Sarah nodded solemnly, then reached up to touch Anna's cheek with fingers soft as flower petals. "Will you come see me again?" "If the good Lord wills it," Anna said, meaning every word. As evening approached, Anna walked away from the dispersing families toward the ancient oak tree that dominated the ranch yard. Its trunk measured 6 feet across. Scarred by lightning strikes but still standing strong after decades of frontier storms. The bark felt rough under her palm, solid and enduring in ways that human settlements rarely achieved. John followed without words, understanding that some moments required the quiet strength of growing things. Lamplight flickered in the infirmary windows behind them, but the building now held only supplies and memories instead of desperate patients fighting for life. "I came here with nothing but herbs and hope in an old carpet bag," Anna said, her fingers tracing lightning scars in the oak's bark. "And built something that'll outlast both of us," John replied, his boots crunching on fallen leaves that released the scent of autumn despite the summer heat. Anna turned to face him, noting how moonlight softened the hard lines carved by years of sun and wind without hiding the strength there. This man had seen her at her absolute worst, crawling through mud, vomiting from fever, cursing her own inadequacy. But he'd also watched her refuse to quit when any reasonable person would have walked away. "If we do this together, help other valleys fight the poisoning. It won't be easy," she said. "More sick children, more families torn apart, more nights wondering if our efforts matter against such calculated evil." John took her work-roughened hands in his own calloused palms, his grip steady as stone foundations. "Figured that out when I saw you open that carpet bag on the depot platform. You were never going to be the kind of woman who sits safe while others suffer." Around them, normal sounds returned to the valley, cattle lowing in distant pastures, owls calling from cottonwood groves, the soft murmur of families sharing evening meals together. Sounds that had been absent during the epidemic's worst days, now restored like a symphony of ordinary miracles. "Marry me," John said, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who'd found his purpose. "Not just as my wife, but as my partner in all this. We'll take what we learned here and use it to save other communities. Make sure no more children die for mining rights." Anna looked up through the oak's spreading branches at stars scattered like scattered grain across the night sky. Somewhere out there, other families faced the same deliberate poisoning that had nearly destroyed their valley. Children were losing parents. Parents were losing children. All so distant men could claim mineral wealth from cleared land. But here, under this lightning-scarred tree, stood proof that such calculated cruelty could be defeated, not through violence or revenge, but through the simple refusal to let people die when they could be saved. "Yes," Anna said, the word carrying weight beyond marriage vows. John's arms came around her, solid and warm in the cooling night air, over his shoulder. Anna could see the infirmary they'd built together, empty now, but ready to serve again when needed. They'd proven something important in this valley, something worth carrying to every threatened community across the territory. The oak tree's branches rustled overhead in the prairie breeze, and Anna realized they were making a promise not just to each other, but to every family still facing poisoned water and calculated murder. They would take their hard-earned knowledge from valley to valley, one community at a time, until the men responsible faced justice for their crimes. Under the ancient oak, with moonlight painting everything silver, Anna Sterling found her true calling, not just as a healer, but as someone who would spend her life proving that human decency was stronger than corporate greed, that ordinary people could defeat extraordinary evil through stubborn compassion and refusal to surrender. The work ahead would be dangerous, heartbreaking, and often thankless. But it was work that mattered, and she would not face it alone. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, the same sound that had brought her here weeks ago as a desperate woman with nothing but hope. Tomorrow, that same train might carry them toward another valley, another fight, another chance to stand between innocence and calculated murder. But tonight, under the oak tree, where lightning had struck but failed to destroy, Anna Sterling held tight to the man who'd seen her worth from the very beginning and prepared to spend their lives proving that love was stronger than greed, healing more powerful than harm. Sometimes I wonder if we've forgotten what real courage looks like in our comfortable modern world. This story of Anna and John Sterling, set in the harsh Texas frontier of 1882, reminds us that true heroism isn't found in grand gestures or newspaper headlines, but in the daily choice to keep helping when everything seems hopeless. Their journey began with a simple recognition that worth isn't measured by appearances or social standing, but by the content of someone's character. It grew into something larger when they discovered that their community's suffering wasn't natural disaster, but deliberate cruelty disguised as misfortune. The Eastern Mining Consortium's systematic poisoning of water supplies revealed how some view human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit. But Anna and John proved that stubborn compassion can overcome calculated evil. Their partnership, her healing knowledge combined with his resources and unwavering support, saved not just individual lives, but an entire community. They showed us that real strength comes from refusing to quit when others give up, from crawling through mud and shame to reach those who need help. In our current world of instant judgments and surface appearances, perhaps we need reminding that the most valuable things often arrive in humble packages, that healing happens through patient care rather than quick fixes, that communities grow stronger when we choose to see potential rather than problems in those around us. The oak tree under which they pledged their future stands as a symbol of endurance, scarred by lightning but still growing, still providing shelter for those who need it. Like Anna and John's mission to protect other valleys from corporate greed, some commitments transcend personal comfort and demand a lifetime of service. This story, inspired by classic Western tales of healing and redemption, was created solely for entertainment purposes and does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.